Yeah, okay. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay, cool. When I hear the word muse, I cringe. As a visual artist and as a woman, this word does not have positive connotations for me. You do not need to have studied art history. You can go to any museum and see the overwhelming number of male artists who have used the female body as their subject matter. Muses were models whom artists became infatuated with, and quite often these models were women with their own unfulfilled artistic dreams. There are other more positive examples of muses in art, but this negative connotation runs pretty deep. When I mentioned to some fellow female artists that I was coming here today to talk about muses, their brows furrowed. The reason I was asked to come here today is because a series of drawings I made were inspired by my father, who passed away at the end of 2014. As I was struggling with my grief, I realized I needed to make work that helped alleviate the overwhelming sadness of his death. He was an architect, and he taught me to examine the built environment around me. Our home was filled with models and blueprints, and even sample materials used during construction. It seemed fitting to commemorate his life through architecture, so I made drawings of Baltimore and of the buildings that comprise the landscape of this city. In each of these drawings, I truly believe that I released a little bit of my sadness. Each drawing became a vessel that could hold a little bit of the crushing weight of my grief. As the series grew, the burden felt lighter, and by the end, I could move on. As I was making the drawings, my mom was sorting through the physical relics of my dad's life, determining what should be donated, what should be kept, and what should be thrown away. It's the task we all must do when a loved one dies. As my mom sorted, things I've never seen before were becoming unearthed. Old art from high school and college had been saved in a portfolio and tucked into the corner of the garage. I looked through some of the drawings that were made during those years, the time before he made drawings that were all lines and measurements, and I realized that I draw the way my father drew, tight and meticulous, with a sincere interest in representing the truth of what a thing is. My father was always a fan of my work, one of my greatest champions, but he never mentioned or maybe even realized himself how much of an influence he had on me. So how can I resolve these two opposing truths? That I have a negative association with the idea of a muse, but that I have been inspired by a person who can be considered my muse. To start, I needed to reaffirm my dislike of this word. Why do I cringe when I hear it? A quick Google search, and I found many articles about the top 10 muses in history. These lists include women like Victorine Meurent and Dora Maar, artists who were known in history mostly for their relationships with male painters and not for their own artistic endeavors. Meurent posed for two of the most famous Manet paintings, Olympia and The Luncheon on the Grass. In these paintings, she is nude, and her gaze towards the viewer is not submissive. During the time these works were made, nudity was acceptable only if it was depicting mythical goddesses and heroines. Meurent was depicted as a modern woman, and so the imagery was highly scandalous, leaving Meurent to be labeled a prostitute. Meurent's own paintings were accepted into salon shows at the time, and on one occasion, her painting was accepted and Manet's was not. But this false reputation would persist and dampen her achievements. In the biographies of Manet, she is described as a drunken whore. After her death, her remaining possessions were burned on a bonfire, and today only one known painting of hers remains. Dora Maar was a surrealist photographer, painter, and poet. Through mutual artist friends, she met Pablo Picasso. It is said that she met Picasso during a difficult time in his life, both professionally and personally, and that her presence reinvigorated him. They met right before World War II, and Maar is credited with persuading the formerly apolitical Picasso to become anti-fascist. When he painted Guernica, one of the most powerful anti-war paintings in history that depicts the bombing of the Spanish town of Guernica, Maar was tasked to document its creation through photography. To many, though, she is simply known as Picasso's lover and the model for the Weeping Woman series. Picasso and Mara's romantic relationship was not positive. Picasso's granddaughter, Marina, you can actually Google that and then get this quote. Picasso's granddaughter, Marina, is quoted as saying this about her grandfather's treatment of women. He submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, and crushed them onto his canvas. After he had spent many nights extracting their essence, once they were bled dry, he would dispose of them. Now that my feathers are sufficiently ruffled, I needed to know where the idea of a muse came from. As someone who had a deep love for folklore as a child, I already knew the muses stemmed from Greek mythology, and that they are traditionally credited as providing poetic, scientific, and musical inspiration. I did not know their full story. They are the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Zeus, as most of us know, is the god of thunder, famous for his temper and his infidelities. I didn't know anything about Mnemosyne. She is a Titan goddess and is attributed as the source of memory. You cannot have knowledge without the ability to remember, and the Greeks considered memory a building block of civilization. The muses initially symbolized the senses, which are the instruments we use to experience and investigate the world around us. The 5 basic senses of sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste lead us to feeling a bevy of emotions, from pleasurable to painful. These emotional experiences and our ability to remember them inspire us to record them. To be able to record meant that we had to have some way to communicate. And so the muses are also credited with the creation of dialects and musical vibrations. It was only later that they were assigned individual specialities such as epic poetry or astronomy. So the muses are the source of our consciousness, giving us the gift of sensation and passing down the gift of memory. And they bestow upon us the ability to convey our stories. That is quite poetic and quite powerful. Maybe my opposing truths don't need to be rectified. I can remain uncomfortable with the usage of the word muse, but also subscribe to it. The tribulations of my own story have been the catalyst defining my inspirations. The same year that my father died, my marriage also ended. A 14-year relationship came abruptly and slowly to a close. It was a hell of a year. I often think of my life in terms of the years before and the years after 2014. That was the year I learned the hard lesson of impermanence of life. It took me time to learn how to live with the awareness that all things end, and I try to channel all I can through the drawings that I make. In the series I did about my father, I depicted public spaces. Everything I drew was available for anyone to see as they moved around Baltimore. As I was finished with that work, I knew I wanted to turn my attention to interior spaces, where privacy was the focus. The drawings that I'm currently working on focus on the most intimate space that a woman occupies, her bedroom. After my marriage ended, I needed to relocate and rebuild my home. Throughout the years since, I have watched women in my life go through the same experience. As their relationships have ended, they have needed to create a new space for themselves to occupy on their own. The resiliency of this ability to rebuild is the inspiration for the series. I chose the bedroom as the focus, and specifically the bed, because this is the room where we are the most vulnerable. As we lay down to sleep, it is here that we need to feel the safest. To depict the bed, especially an unmade bed, is to easily place the woman in her space, but not rely upon her physical presence to dictate how we imagine that space to feel. When choosing bedrooms to draw, I only follow one rule, and that is that each bedroom that I depict is a bedroom that only one woman occupies. It is entirely hers. No matter where a woman is in her life or at what age, to have a room of her own is important. A space where she can find peace and security not always available outside of those walls. I put a call out for volunteers, and I received an overwhelming response. It reaffirmed the value of these drawings and the importance of this space, that women wanted their own to be documented and preserved. I expect to be making these drawings for a long while, slowly documenting as many as I can. I would love to have been able to draw the bedrooms of Victorine Morant and Dora Maar. Even as their lives took unfortunate turns, they were still paving the way for me to be able to freely make art today. Their boldness and their tenacity is inspiring, but I still don't want to call them muses. I still don't want to use that word to describe my father or my friends. That word has just been so distorted that it may always leave a bad taste in my mouth. But I'm on board with seeking inspiration, be it in a person or a place. A friend recently told me that he makes yearly trips to Sedona, Arizona, because the red dirt of the landscape against the blue sky stirs in him the deepest kind of joy. And he takes this joy and he uses it to write music. Just as joy can be a creative catalyst, so can pain be. When we survive the toughest times in our lives, we can muster the greatest kind of strength, the kind that allows us to tell the truth of our own stories. In the act of sharing, we create connections. We foster empathy and love. To limit where inspiration can come from is to limit ourselves. To every woman who has been called a muse, I salute you, and I hope that the cost was not too great. And on behalf of every woman, fuck Picasso.
Thanks, Erin. So to start, this slide thing's not going to work, is it? Where do you want me to go? For just the next slide. It says connection lost, Mario. I don't know what to do about that. I'm sorry. So we're going to open it up for y'all. So think about your questions, and I'll run around with the mic. And this mic, you have to eat it. So just get ready for that. But to start, can you name a couple female artists that you think everyone in this room should know about?
Yes.
So the next slide.
Yeah. So Via Salmons is if I could have an art godmother, she would be it. She is the queen of really representing the truth of what a thing looks like. In the photo that I have here, these are a series of found rocks and recreated rocks. So she found these rocks and then she essentially remade them through sculpting and through painting. So she's just, in my mind, just the ultimate badass lady who does the thing that I love to do. Makita Ahuja, if you don't know her, she used to be based here in Baltimore. She won the Guggenheim last spring, I believe, which is one of the biggest, most famous art awards that you can win. So she is a serious badass. She is also a good friend of mine. But she makes work where she essentially is putting herself into the history of art. So nobody that looks like her is in the history of art, in paintings. And so she is inserting herself into that history, and she makes beautiful, large, bold paintings. And then Jackie Malad is another friend of mine. She is a Baltimore-based artist. She was a finalist in the Sondheim exhibition, so you might have seen her work at the Walters. She currently has a solo show. I'm going to rep hard for her. Down the street at Grimaldis Gallery. It just opened last night. It is stunning. Jackie does work that is, it's both abstract and representational. She pulls a lot of symbols and iconography from her heritage of Egyptian and Honduran. So she, does work that is very playful. We did a series, or it's a small, tiny series together where we sort of combined our two artistic styles, and it was a lot of fun. But you should know all of these women.
So you all have homework. Who has a question? I can ask another question. So how did you start as an artist?
I think it was the thing that I did because I got sent to my room a lot. And so, I didn't have a TV, I didn't have a phone, I didn't have an iPad, so I had to just occupy my time. And it turned out that the best way that I knew how to do that was to sit and make drawings about all kinds of crazy, highly dramatic things, lots of fashion drawings happening. Or it was to write stories. My grandmother was getting rid of an old typewriter, and so she just gave me one. And so I would just sit in my room and I would essentially daydream and just come up with just stuff to draw, stuff to write about. And none of it was any good, but it was really, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. And then as I just kept doing it, my family was like, oh, Erin actually is not bad at doing this thing. And so then they would constantly sort of give me a lot of, affirmation. They would get me supplies. They would be like, you want to take this class here? But I remember the most impactful experience I had as a kid that I still bring with me today every time I'm like, can I do this thing? Is when I was 10, and my grandmother asked me if I wanted to do face painting at a church festival or something, and I was like, I'm 10. Can I do that? Is that a thing I can do? And she was like, yes. And so I prepared a book of different things I could paint on your face, and I practiced, and I had my little book, and I painted so many faces that day, and I made money.
So how did you arrive at charcoal being your primary medium?
So when I went to MICA from 2000 to 2004. When I arrived there, I had not really received a formal training in art. I went to a high school that had a good art program, but it sort of dabbled in a lot of things. And so when I arrived, I felt very overwhelmed with just how good all of my classmates were at the basics of things like drawing and painting. And I was essentially just I gotta know one of these things really well. And so I just decided that I really wanted to learn how to draw. And charcoal is the medium that they give you in the basic life drawing classes because it's the cheapest thing, it's the fastest thing. And I just loved it because it's really versatile, it's a little messy, so you feel like you're getting into something. But I just really stuck with it, and it just really spoke to me, and I really loved that I was making things in black and white and not in color, because I love tonal value so much. So I think those things just sort of just happen naturally.
A question.
Hi. How do you know when a work of art is done?
It depends. Sometimes when I have achieved the thing that I wanted to, when it looks like how I want it to look, I'll just be like, okay, that's good now. But sometimes it's when I'm just emotionally done. Because some drawings definitely are a little bit harder to do than other drawings, and I'll get to the point where I'm like, I cannot look at this thing anymore. And if I do, I will probably hurt it somehow. And so I just will be like, okay, we need to walk away. So it depends. Sometimes it's a positive ending, and sometimes it's I just gotta go somewhere kind of ending.
So I'm curious, as far as you've got multiple subject matter, and certainly the series on the bedrooms is really arresting. Do you apply the same process to every subject, or do you bring something new and something different to your process as you approach it?
I think that a little bit of both. So my process is pretty set. I take photos and I work from reference photos. And so for the architecture series, I could just be wandering around, nobody's paying attention to me, just taking a lot of pictures. And then just going home and deciding which one of those pictures looks really good. And then if I didn't quite get it, I could easily go back and I could just try again. Or if I wanted this sunny sky versus that gray sky. With the bedroom series, I'm in someone else's space. And that's been a really interesting experience to navigate because everyone has been incredibly welcoming. but I'm still hanging out in someone's bedroom. And sometimes I know them really well, and sometimes I don't. I've never been in the space before. With all of the drawings I did of Baltimore, like those are things that I saw all the time. I passed by them, I had experiences, around them. But these were rooms that I'd never been in before. I didn't know what they looked like. And so I feel like I needed to adopt like a whole new set of skills and think more like a photographer and just try to capture, like the best composition and angle possible, like as quickly as possible. Because like I couldn't go back. I couldn't, and a lot of times I am sort of like at whatever schedule is best for that person, even if the light is not quite how I would want it to be. So in that case, yeah, it's just been a difference of like access and also making sure that I represent this space as truthfully as possible. Like I don't want to like change anything. I'm not gonna like, I will unmake a bed. That's about as far as I go, because everyone makes their bed, because they're like, my mom would be really angry if I didn't make my bed before you came here today. And a lot of times I'm like, can I just like undo what you just did? But I want to, represent the space, and I want to be truthful about what's there, but I also want to make a drawing that looks really good. And so like those two things, I'm constantly kind of like trying to juggle. But so far it's worked, I think, pretty well. But it is definitely something that I think about.
Good morning. I'm Krisa from Greece. You did an excellent job at presenting the Muses, the mythological side.
Awesome.
My question is, do you find yourself in your creative life being stuck and having difficulty being creative? And if yes, what do you do then?
Currently, I'm very unstuck. Currently, I am struggling with just having enough time in my studio to work, which I think can be as frustrating as not feeling creative. Because it's just you're just trying to do something, you're trying to get something done, but you're not able to move fast enough. And so I think the same kind of angst can happen between the two. But right now I'm in the position where like I'm just like brimming with ideas, and I just don't know yet how to make some of them happen. And that's like a really exciting thing, but also kind of a terrifying thing, because like if you haven't quite figured something out yet, it can be a little stressful. But I have been in the position before where I wasn't sure what I wanted to draw. And during those times, I make a lot of bad drawings. I think after I finished the Baltimore series, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next. I had completed what I needed to do with the series, and I hadn't made that next move yet. And so I think I was drawing a lot of skulls and like dead things. Like I totally have like an IKEA bag of skulls in my basement right now, and I don't know what to do with them. And so it's definitely, there's a period between each body of work that's probably like at least 6 months of me just like doing really bad stuff. But you have to do that in order to get to the good stuff. Like you just have to have that period of time where you're just like working through things. And like sometimes people look at those drawings and they're like, that's amazing. And you're like, no, it's not. But if you want to buy it, it's yours. So yeah. And I think that a lot of times artists put a lot of pressure on themselves to constantly being producing. And idle time is very important. And I know I'm glad that I've realized that, because like my idle time is when I actually come up with my best ideas. And that idle time can be anything from like I'm spending a lot of time doing a lot of reading, watching movies, and I'm not talking like fancy art movies, like I'm talking like my boyfriend made me go see John Wick. All of these things, like you are constantly taking in, all kinds of visual stimulation or emotional stimulation based on what's going on in the news. And all of these things, like your brain is constantly processing them when you're not aware of it. And so you need to be just like chill, sitting in a chair, relaxing, so that your brain can like let all those things sort of pop up to the surface so that you can pay attention.
So we have time for one more question. Woo, fast hand right here.
Can you speak a little bit more about that experience of finding your father's drawings? And I mean, it sounds like finding an old photo of a family member and being like, I look just like them, but I've never really heard of that happening with like an artifact of a creative process.
Yeah. It was pretty wild. I had a show at Goucher College the summer of 2017, and it was a really big space to fill. And I could have gone into like crazy production mode and just like, cranked out a lot of drawings, but I took advantage of having that much space in that I had the drawings that I did, and then I set up a little museum of artifacts from my dad's life. And so I essentially just like took all these things that my mom was finding and I put them on display as if it was like a museum. There's like plexiglass and there's like little explanations of everything. And as I was going through the things, I was kind of like, oh, this is really interesting. But then when I had it like up on the wall and I had like my drawings across from like his like photographs of his like models, which he lit dramatically, and they're in like black and white. And then his drawings that he just did of like photographs from magazines. He went to Polytech, so he was doing a lot of like technical kinds of drawings of like nuts and bolts, which that had to have been really painful to do, but it was really amazing to see. And I think it is really interesting like how, I guess it makes a lot of sense, but I was also really surprised. But I think a lot about how you make work is a lot about your temperament. And definitely I'm probably like more like a kind of person, and I think my dad was a lot like that, and it makes sense that I just got that from him. But knowing that it was like something that was passed down made it like really special. So it was nice. It was a nice sort of thing to realize. Sadly, after his death, so we couldn't talk about it, but yeah.
Can you all help me thank Erin again?